Hey, welcome to January's Ask an Editor. This month, we're going to be talking about point of view and answering the question, how can I fix point of view issues?
So, my name is Eva Barrows, and I am a developmental editor for fiction and nonfiction books. And I'm also a book writing coach and a publication manager for newsletters, blogs, and magazines.
And my name is Lila. I have LaBine editorial and I do copy editing for fiction and beta reading for specific fiction genres. And then I proofread screenplays.
I'm just going to talk a little bit about the importance of point of view in storytelling. When I started writing my novel, like the biggest question I had was, what point of view am I going to use? I felt like I couldn't start writing the story until I knew how I was going to tell it. So I thought about the role I wanted point of view to play in my novel. And I knew that I wanted to create an intimacy while closely connecting to the main character's thoughts, emotions, and actions. And so this ruled out a couple of different types of point of view, especially like an omniscient third person narrator. And we'll talk about, what these things mean later on. And then also like if I was going to make the reader a character in my story, it would be very difficult to do. And then I decided to write my novel in the first person, present tense, and that puts the reader alongside my heroine as she experiences the plot. And then just by figuring out how I would tell the story really got me excited and started on writing my novel.
So we're going to first make sure that we're all on the same page regarding definitions for certain words that we're going to be talking about or using in this presentation. And the first is narrator. So the narrator is the person who tells the story. They might not be directly involved in the story action as a character themselves. They can be the protagonist, the lead character of the story, or they can be another character who follows the protagonist's action. And then in a memoir, this is often the author. But in fiction, the author and the narrator are two separate things. So, who is the author? The author is the person who creates the story, and they decide who the narrator is and what kind of voice and personality the narrator has. And point of view is just the way the narrator tells the story's events. It's the manner in which the story is told. And an example is first person, second person, third person, etc.
And then perspective, this is how the narrator interprets the events of the story. And it's based on the narrator's frame of reference, their personality, and their background. The author can choose an all-knowing distant perspective and then going all the way down to a character level with a limited perspective.
And narrative distance is how far the narrator is from the characters and the events in the story. Basically, it's just how close the readers feel to the characters and what's happening in the story. So you can be really zoomed in, and the readers are like deep in the character's mind and experiencing the events almost like as if it's happening to them, or you can be really zoomed out and the readers are only aware of what the characters are saying and doing. So I created this little spectrum, and basically if you're writing in like we're going to talk about each of these, but if you're writing in second person or third person, first person, or deep third, it's a very intimate story. You're going to feel deep in the mind, or you're going to feel like you're there. Whereas if the narrative distance is wider on this right end of the spectrum, it's going to feel like all you're doing is kind of like watching a movie. You can see what they're doing and saying, but not know what they're thinking.
So, so how do you decide what narrative distance you're going to use? So if the story is about a personal struggle, then you might want to use a point of view that zooms in on your protagonist. And then if your story is a comment on society, you might want to zoom out to show the big picture of just social interaction between characters. So tense, you might hear point of view designations like first person present tense or third person limited past tense. So tense here refers to when the narrative action is taking place. So that could be in the past, in the present, or the future. And then just a quick reminder of first person present tense might sound like I am at the store, the cashier is talking too much, so it's happening, right now. Or in past tense, I went to the store, the cashier talked too much. But so you can kind of just see the differences there and figure, if you want to write your novel, in a certain way. If you use present tense, the narrator will not have access to what happens in the future. The narrator only knows what is happening right now and in the past. And that's just kind of like, how we experience life. And then present tense can create a more immediate reader experience of the action that's happening because it's happening right now.
We're going to talk about the different types of point of view.
So second person, this is kind of an unusual way to go. So the narrator uses the pronoun you and addresses so this is addressing the reader or treating the reader as if they're a character in the story. And this is for fiction. So just as an example, it might start off like, you are trying to make your way through the dark house without hyperventilating. You have to get that gun fast. So you can see how this kind of puts you in the story. So in nonfiction, the author uses the pronoun you to address the reader. However, the reader does not become an active participant in the narration. So this is kind of like a side note. Just you can, if you're reading a blog post, they might talk about how you can make something, but that's not making you a character in that article, basically. Second person narration tells the reader what we thought and did, and the reader, excuse me, the reader feels connected to the story because they are involved as a character. And then this is what so what the readers see and experience is controlled by the author. And then there's a lot of limitations to this type of point of view. It can turn off your reader if they don't want to experience the plot and associated emotions. So say if it's particularly violent or gross and people don't want to be that character. So use second person sparingly or alternate chapters or use it just in a section for effect if you want to create a specific effect. A justified reason for using it might be the main character is having a hard time with what happened to them in the past or what happened to them. And so they're seeing that they're kind of disconnecting and they're seeing themselves as you and they're externalizing it and putting a distance between them and what happened, the traumatic experience. First person, this is something that's more commonly used. The narrator uses the pronoun I, and that makes the narrator a character in the story. So as an example, the lights flickered on and I gasped. There she was, and she already had my gun. Damn, she sneered at me. I'd play it cool. So in this instance, the reader experiences the story through a single character's eyes. The first person point of view creates intimacy and empathy for the narrator, and the reader is plugged into the narrator's thoughts and feelings. And there are some limitations to using first person. It's harder for the author to develop plot points from just one character's experience. You might have several people, but you're only going to be able to follow that one person. Um, and so it's difficult to reveal non-point of view characters' thoughts and emotions or motivations. And then the first person point of view character has limited knowledge of what's happening around them. And this is great for adding suspense and intrigue. So they're just kind of just knowing what they see and what they know. And that's it. That's it. Yeah. So overcoming some of these first person challenges could include using dialogue to get across important information. So through the course of a conversation, you can allow the reader to discover as the first person narrator learns new information. Use the narrator's voice to demonstrate their personality. So how do they talk and how do they interact with others? And then it's usually not natural for a first person narrator to describe themselves just all at once. So through the course of the first few chapters, you can sprinkle in some self-description along with the story action so readers can start to visualize what the narrator looks like and how they behave.
Okay, so third person, you're going to see the pronouns she, they, he, and the narrator is a character in the story. And there are many different labels under the third person category, but they're common ones, and the ones we're going to talk about are limited, deep, omniscient, and objective. In limited third, readers are limited to the knowledge of the point of view character. So the lights flickered on and he gasped. He saw her standing there with his gun in her hands. She sneered at him and he decided to act calm. Deep or close third is like a subcategory of limited, and all it means is that you're just deeper into the point of view character's mind. So it kind of feels more like you're reading their thoughts directly. Let's see, the narrative distance is short, so it's closer to like first person or second person, and readers feel close to the action. And the narrative is told using language that the point of view character would use. So not just the dialogue is in the language that the point of view character would use, but also even the narration, because it's almost like you're reading their thoughts. So an example that we read the example of limited, but if you wanted to make that a deep third, you would write, the lights flickered on and he gasped. There she was. Damn, she already had his gun. Ugh, that sneer on her face. He'd play it cool. So you can see how it's a little more like you're reading his thoughts rather than just reading about what he's thinking or of what he's seeing. And then omniscient is also a third person point of view, but it's different from limited. The pronouns are the same, she, he, they. The narrator, though, is not usually a character themselves, and they're like an all-knowing entity. So readers have access to many of the different characters' thoughts and emotions and motivations because the narrator is telling the story about. It feels like the narrator is telling you a story. The narrator can reveal anything that has happened, will happen, is happening, because they know everything. And the way that they're telling it is through the narrator's own perspective and strong personality. So you might be learning the thoughts and emotions of the other characters, but you're hearing it through the narrator's perspective. And the narrator is someone usually out of the story. Jane Austen is really well known for writing in omniscient, and I just read Curtis Sittenfeld's Eligible, which is a modern retelling of Pride and Prejudice, and that's another great example of omniscient. So here's an example. The lights flickered on and he gasped. He saw her standing there with his gun already in her hands. But James was not a man who panicked, even when a circumstance seemed hopeless. He remained still and waited for her to speak. Feeling more powerful than ever, Lana allowed an ugly sneer to cross her beautiful face. Neither of them knew that the gun was empty of bullets. So you're getting both of their thoughts, kind of, but from the narrator's perspective. And the narrator is kind of like putting judgments on them. So we know that the narrator thinks that, James is a man who does not panic. And the narrator thinks that Lana is beautiful. And then we hear things that neither Lana nor James would know. And that's okay because this is omniscient.
So there are some limitations when you're using omniscient point of view. It's easy to slip into telling instead of showing what happened. The narration is always distant from the character emotions. There's a danger that you might use too much exposition, which you can go back and edit later. And then also, if you pick a narrator that's not interesting enough to engage the reader, and then excessive head hopping. So we're going to talk a lot about head hopping, but although moving through from character to character is a signature omniscient narrator move, just be careful of causing reader whiplash if you're going to be moving back and forth between characters. And then the omniscient narrator can change viewpoint mid-scene and mid-paragraph. It can dip into several characters' heads one after the other. However, this movement keeps the reader from fully engaging with a specific character. The reader will see things as the narrator sees them and not as the characters are experiencing the plot.
And then there's objective third, which is, I think, also pretty rare these days. But basically, it's similar to screenwriting. So you are only giving information to the readers that they could actually see or hear on a TV screen or a movie theater screen. So it's the most distant point of view. We have no access to the character's thoughts or feelings, only what they do and say. It's like watching hidden camera footage. The lights flickered on and he gasped. He stood in a corner of the room with a She stood in a corner of the room with a gun in her hands. She sneered at him, but his face showed no emotion. So you see everything in those sentences we can see or hear on a screen. We're not knowing what they're feeling or thinking.
So now we'll get into a little bit about how you can choose a point of view. And then some point of view trends that we're noticing right now. Third person close point of view in the past tense seems to be the most popular point of view right now. It allows readers to follow the characters as they experience the world, and it seems to be the easiest technique for authors to pull off successfully. Omniscient point of view is seen as a classic storytelling technique, and it's not used as much in contemporary fiction, but it's still here. Young adult and literary fiction use the first person present tense a lot so that readers can experience along with the narrator. And then just a little bit more about how to choose a point of view. So when you're trying to figure it out, you can ask yourself, what genre are you writing in? And then it's always good to look at contemporary examples of whatever type of writing that you're doing, and then just kind of see what the narration expectations are that readers have for the type of story that you're telling. And then always think to yourself, how close do you want readers to feel to your story? Like, I wanted my readers to kind of go along with the main character. So do you want that immersive experience, or do you want to back away and look at things from a distance? And then Are you telling a story that needs an external narrator with their own voice? So there's several reasons why you might want that. And it could be you're making social commentary, or you want to guide readers through a difficult subject, or just have a pal on a fun adventure.
Okay, so we're going to talk about common point of view issues that each of us sees when we're editing our clients' work.
So I just had some point of view rules or guidelines here. Just number one, do not confuse your reader. So there's many different things, techniques you can use. Just make sure that the reader can, get through the story as easily as possible. And then don't make writing harder on yourself than it needs to be, because there's a lot of different choices, but like what feels. So try out the point of view and see how it feels, and then listen to your gut for how best to tell your story. And then as long as the reader can easily follow what's happening, responsible switching levels of point of view is acceptable. And then there needs to be a storytelling reason for switching point of view levels and characters.
One of the things that I see is not remaining consistent, not keeping a consistent point of view within a scene. So if you're writing in anything but objective or omniscient, it should be consistent for a whole scene. Readers expect to remain in the head of the point of view character, and then when you suddenly drop them into the mind of another character, it's kind of like it's jarring, and it momentarily pulls them out of the story. And that's what head hopping is. So you can do this in a well-written omniscient point of view because the all-knowing narrator has already been really set up intentionally, and readers know that they're going to be hearing about what's in the mind of the other characters through the narrator's perspective. But when you're in a limited third, you are expecting to hear everything through the point of view character's perspective, if that makes sense. So here's an example of not remaining consistent. Mateo couldn't make it through dinner. As soon as the waiter left, he pulled the box from his pocket and got down on one knee. Mari's heart skipped a beat and then began racing. No, this could not be happening to her. Mateo grinned at his girlfriend. She would love this. Of course she'd say yes. So you can see we're hopping from Mateo to Mari to Mateo, and really we should just be getting one of their perspective. So I fixed it here. Mateo couldn't make it through dinner. As soon as the waiter left, he pulled the box from his pocket and got down on one knee. As he looked into Mari's eyes, Mateo caught the quickest flash of some emotion. Disgust? No, he must have imagined it. He grinned at his girlfriend. She would love this. Of course she'd say yes. So now here the author was able to get across that maybe Mari isn't happy about this proposal, but she kept it through Mateo's point of view, through his perspective. That way we're not readers aren't being thrown into one mind and then the other and then the other.
Trading viewpoints requires a clear division, like the start of a new chapter or a scene break, between the scenes. So when switching the viewpoint, establish the new point of view character right away, so readers are grounded in the new scene. And then you can use a characteristic thought pattern to differentiate the new point of view from the previous point of view character. So a story might require switching point of view characters if you're doing a braided narrative. So that's point of view characters switching off chapters or portions of the story. So an example of that could be you could break the novel into like 4 parts. So part 1 could be for Nora's point of view, then part 2 could be for Rick, and then you can go back part 3 for Nora, part 4 for Rick. So you can also alternate chapters, which would be the braid. So you're going to equally braid two or more characters. So one chapter is Nora, then the next one's Rick, and then back and forth like that. And that would tell your story from two different characters' point of view. You can also use a narrative frame that can end cap a story. So you could start with an omniscient point of view to show townspeople or suspects. If you're writing a mystery, you're just kind of showing the overall lay of the land, and then you get closer to the point of view characters in the following chapters. And that's
And another thing I see when editing is when the reader knows something that they shouldn't. So readers should not get to know or experience anything that the point of view character doesn't know or experience. And I'm talking about limited third or first person. So here's an example. Mateo couldn't make it through dinner. As soon as the waiter left, he pulled the box from his pocket and got down on one knee. Mari, I know it's been only a month, but will you marry me? As he looked into Mari's eyes, Mateo caught the quickest flash of some emotion. Disgust? No, he must have imagined it. Luke glimpsed the disgust, though, from the kitchen door. So that last little part is the part where readers are getting info that Mateo doesn't know. Mateo is the point of view character here. So there's no way he could know right now that Luke is seeing that Mari is disgusted with the proposal. We are only supposed to be getting Luke's perspective, Mateo's point of view. So we're going to fix it. Mateo couldn't make it through dinner. As soon as the waiter left, he pulled the box from his pocket and got down on one knee. Mari, I know it's only been a month, but will you marry me? As he looked into Mari's eyes, Mateo caught the quickest flash of some emotion. Disgust? No, he must have imagined it. He glanced over his shoulder. Luke was watching them from the kitchen. Was Luke hoping Mari said no? So there, the author they changed it so that Mateo is looking over his shoulder and can see Luke. So that makes more sense because then we're still from Mateo's point of view in his perspective. Now, there's no way the author can tell the readers that Luke is noticing the disgust on Mari's face, but we can, the readers can feel whatever Mateo is thinking or guessing about what Luke is thinking.
mm-hmm.
And then another thing I see often is not keeping the narrative distance short enough when you're writing deep third. So when you're writing deep third, remember your readers should be able to get really deep into your character's mind, your point of view character's mind. So you're not going to be using filter words, and you want to use language that's tailored to the point of view character's personality. And you don't need to italicize internal monologue or like the point of view character's thoughts, because in deep third, it's almost like you're already just reading. Readers know that they're already kind of just reading the character's thoughts. The whole thing is kind of like the character's, what's going on in the character's mind. So just like from the example earlier, with limited, we have he saw, he decided, those are filters. So it's kind of like telling the reader about what the character is experiencing. Whereas when you cut those filters out, the reader is just experiencing it and not being told about it. It's hard to explain, but the lights flickered on and he gasped. There she was. Damn, she already had his gun. Ugh, that sneer on her face. He'd play it cool. So there's no italicizing of his thoughts because the whole thing is just kind of his thoughts. And then not giving each point of view character their own voice in a multiple point of view story. So just like Eva was saying, whereas if you have the braided narrative or, you're switching off chapter to chapter, the point of view changes, that's fine. But you want to make sure that it's really obvious to readers whose chapter it is, not just by the title on the chapter maybe, but also within the chapter, it should be obvious because the narration and that character's dialogue should be very tailored to that character's personality and background. And so the way you can do that is just make sure you know each character really well, know your characters, and know like what the level of formality is, like when they speak. Do they have any pet words or phrases that they like to use? Do they stutter or have an accent? Be careful with those because they can be easily overdone. Regional phrases, so where do they come from, and do they use certain words certain ways because of that, and any slang that they use. And when you really make it obvious, your readers will just have a better time, easier time reading. They won't have to go back to the beginning of the chapter to check, okay, wait, whose point of view is this? So that's helpful.
So there are some more tricky types of point of view. So I always would suggest, choosing the simplest, clearest, least noticeable technique to accomplish what your story requires. But you might think you're brilliant if you're using first person present tense plural, which would be we. So we watch the waitress set a platter full of steaming hot spaghetti in front of us. We nod our heads and get down to business. We slurp and feel the sauce run down our chins. It's difficult to keep things in present tense. And then how long will there be two or more characters together to believably, use we? So there's other stylistic choices like this, like we, they, you. So writing a full novel in these kind of point of views would be a challenge. Keeping the point of view consistent would be difficult. A narrative distance and feeling of inauthenticity is created. And then if you want to play around with kind of these different types of point of views, you can try them in a short story first, and then most likely you can you can probably get through a short story and get your point across just kind of in a short manner instead of trying to get a full novel done. And then just when you're self-editing, or even if you want to just work with an editor on point of view, things to look out for would be like tracking that consistent use of point of view, until you have your clear spot where you're going to switch if you do switch. Keep the tense use consistent, keep it in the past or the present tense. Clearly identify which point of view is being used. And that's a lot of what Lila was just talking about, just the different characteristics. And then any switches that you make sure they're done purposefully and not accidental. And then ensure it's easy for the reader to follow your story.
Okay, so next month we are going to be talking about the show don't tell rule and answering the question, how can I balance showing and telling in my story?